It's Charlie from Silent Talkies, and the first episode in a series during which I will investigate why a silent star's talking picture stardom did not stick. If you have not seen my pilot introduction episode from last week, please see it for more information about my research and what I'm going to be doing with this series. As I mentioned in that pilot episode, I will be focusing on those silent stars that transitioned into sound, but couldn't make it stick for some reason, and their careers faded sooner rather than later. I also mentioned last time that the first star on whom I chose to focus is Betty Compson. My initial fascination with Betty Compson began with 1931's The Lady Refuses, which I was fortunate enough to catch on TCM last month. Betty delivered a delightful performance about a down-on-her-luck woman on her last penny who's about to sell her body for food, but who has a chance encounter with an eccentric elderly millionaire which changes both of their lives forever. I'll come back to The Lady Refuses later. Before I investigate why Betty's stardom did not last long in the talkies, I will briefly explain to you her life and silent career, with a few clips. The Lady Refuses was actually not my first awareness of Betty and her talent. Years ago, I read about her in my grandfather's coffee table book, Chronicle of the Cinema. I also was familiar with her from some of my Oscar history books written by Robert Osborne at TCM, which her Oscar nomination was in 1929 for the film The Barker. And now, a brief history of her life and career. Betty Compson was born in 1897 in Beaver, Utah, to working-class parents. At some point, they moved to Salt Lake City, where Betty, who had already begun to learn and play violin, at the age of 16, began playing violin with the orchestra that provided accompaniment for silent films and vaudeville acts at the Mission Theater. This was around 1913. As you will see later in this video, her playing was so impressive, apparently even at age 16. She eventually caught the eye of someone from the Pantages vaudeville circuit who hired her and billed her as a solo act called The Vagabond Violinist. By 1915, she had taken her vaudeville act to Los Angeles, where someone from the Christie Studios, maybe even producer Al Christie, spotted her and signed her to act in his comedic shorts. Between 1915 and 1918, she filmed over 80 shorts for Christie, including It's the Class, where she was billed as Dainty Betty Compson, and Whose Wife, where she shared the screen with smiling Billy Mason. As you can see from these Christie posters, Betty was one of the studio's most publicized stars, and her draw appeared to be her beauty and her youth. This particular poster says, "Betty is the prettiest, daintiest little star in the comedy field." I couldn't find any exact film grosses or critical reviews for her shorts in my research. I can only assume that they were successful and very popular based on the amount of publicity and sheer number of them that were made alone. Hubby's Night Out from 1917 was one of her Christie shorts, which thanks to the historians at Cinematic Brussels, I have a short clip from you. As you can see, Betty showed a flair for physical comedy and facial expressions. Her character is always making some kind of facial expression to exhibit to the audience what she is feeling very, very clearly. A talent that will help her out for the rest of her career. By 1918, she had parted ways with Christie and made a western for Pathé entitled The Terror of the Range. I wish I could see this film by the title alone, but the film is now lost. However, it allowed her to meet a lot of important Hollywood people, which led to her then being cast in The Miracle Man in 1919 for Paramount. The film that truly launched her into stardom, along with her co-stars Thomas Meehan and Lon Chaney. Just this brief clip of Paramount advertising the film years later survives. In the film, Betty had finally been allowed to graduate from Dainty Ingenue Wives to play a hardened member of a criminal gang that planned to use a phony miracle man to scam local folks into giving them money. However, the miracle man actually produces a miracle when he cures a young child's limp, and then everyone's lives are changed forever for the better. This vampy, gun mall type of character forever changed the direction of Betty's career, a type of character that she would later humorously refer to as My Girl. Based on My Girl's success, Paramount signed her to a contract. While I could not find exactly how this happened, Betty was able to then also form her own production company under Samuel Goldwyn Pictures in 1921 and independently produce 2 of her films there. This may have been because Samuel Goldwyn used to work with Paramount when it was known as Famous Players Lasky. His whole career is a whole other saga that I can maybe come back to in another video. Unfortunately, both films, Prisoners of Love and For Those We Love, are lost. While Betty was praised for her acting in the films, critics, including the one from Variety, were not kind about her production efforts. Regardless, her taking control of her career briefly was still quite an achievement for a female actor at that time in Hollywood. While Betty never produced another film, she returned to Paramount to make 15 more films between 1921 and 1923. Only 4 of these films are known to be extant currently. When Paramount refused to give her a raise in 1923, Betty left. She took control of her career and left for England, where she made 4 films, 3 of which were early projects for a young Alfred Hitchcock, including The White Shadow, which was recently discovered in New Zealand and has been preserved and restored. Hitchcock mainly served as the assistant director and sometimes screenwriter on these productions. More about him later, as he will come back to Betty's career. The other 3 films are unfortunately lost. These films were released in the US, but they proved to be very successful there, causing Paramount to take notice and hire her back with her raise. Betty clearly knew exactly what she was doing. She made 11 more Paramount films between 24 and 25, the last of which being The Pony Express that you can see a bit of here. As you can see, she plays kind of a virtuous-looking Western woman that Ricardo Cortez is trying to speak to, kind of a departure from her vampy type of my girl roles that she had been popular playing. After another disagreement with Paramount, she left and freelanced, which was also very rare at that time. Some of her freelance films were at Poverty Row Studios. If you don't know, these are cheaper studios that made cheaper films, cheaper than, let's say, major studios like Paramount or MGM. I say cheaper meaning financially. It doesn't mean the quality is any less. It just means they were more cheaply made and usually released as B pictures rather than A pictures. When some publications labeled her all washed up because she dared to work at Poverty Row Studios, Betty responded with, "They offered me good money and my girl some fascinating situations," end quote. She may not have been under contract to a major studio, but she was still starring in films and calling the shots, which is exactly what she always wanted to do. Again, this type of autonomy for a female in Hollywood was almost unheard of at that time. She knew exactly what she wanted and went for it and didn't let anyone stand in her way. She continued to give stellar performances and caught the eye of many people, including MGM, who briefly considered replacing Greta Garbo with her in Flesh and the Devil, if you can believe it, when Garbo's demands were seen as difficult, which they probably weren't. I can't talk about Louis B. Mayer, that'll be a whole nother tirade. Anywho, when Flesh and the Devil didn't work out, she also caught the eye of Joseph von Sternberg, who cast her as the female lead in The Docks of New York in 1928. As you can see here. Most critics and film scholars consider this to be Betty's finest hour as an actress. She plays a prostitute who is rescued from suicide by a hardworking, heroic sailor played by George Bancroft, whom she marries on a whim that night in a bar. Also starring Olga Baklanova, this film was a critical and commercial success, despite being released against some early talking pictures. As you can see, there is a certain cool, casual aloofness about Betty's characterization of May, masking a hidden anguish of tragedy and loss that she had experienced up to that point. Only 30 at the time, Betty's face displays a world weariness of a woman decades older. Betty made just one more partial silent film after Docks and made the transition to sound seemingly effortlessly. Her first talker was The Barker, released in 1928 and co-starred Milton Sills, Dorothy McHale, and Douglas Fairbanks Jr., all former silent stars. She played Carrie, a dancing girl at the carnival, where the Barker, the title role played by Milton Sills, worked. Betty won rave reviews for this role, including the New York Times, which said that she gave a sterling performance. When nominations were coming about for the second annual Academy Awards, she was nominated for Best Actress. I'll talk about that in a second. The Barker continued Betty's tradition of presenting carefully constructed, subtly nuanced characters that contained many layers beneath the surface. When she was talking about the roles that she played in 1928, Betty stated, "My wickedness has kept me going. I wouldn't have lasted 5 years as an ingenue, yet you cannot call my girl a stereotyped vamp," end quote. She was taking this kind of vampy type role that Theda Bara had originated in the 19-teens and making her more complex, more feeling, more identifiable, something that was very different from what folks had seen on the screen before, and was kind of what was making Betty so well known and so popular. For The Barker, like I said, she was nominated for an Oscar for Best Actress in 1929. While her role is more of a supporting role in the movie, that category didn't exist at the time, so she was nominated for Best Actress. Unfortunately, she did not win. The film survives as a print at the UCLA Film and Television Archive in Los Angeles, I have not seen it yet, but obviously you know I will be there to see it. It's next time I am in Los Angeles. Now, with the success of The Barker, you know what? Before I move into Betty's full talkie career, I'm going to stop and make a second video for part 2, because there's simply just too much of her awesomeness to put in this first video. I'm going to make a second video, so stay tuned for Betty Compson part 2. I'm Charlie, and thank you for joining me.